Can people even get a second citizenship? Can they get another residence? Or are they going to be stuck with that for the rest of their lives? I want to thank Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist for joining us today. Andrew, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Today, we are going to talk about all things related to geopolitics. We're going to look at second citizenships, and there's a lot of mystery behind this topic. There's a lot of, let's just call them people in the shadows, and these unknown subjects, and they start to get a lot of people that are not exactly the most legitimate behind it. And I wanted to talk about the very first topic is, as an American, what are the options? Can people even get a second citizenship? Can they get another residence? Or are they going to be stuck with that for the rest of their lives?
Well, not only are you not stuck with it, but there's many options. I think people don't often understand how many citizenships you can have. And they've heard about dual citizenship. I've got 3 adopted sisters. They came over, they became dual citizens. Like, people understood that. In most countries, if you can have dual citizenship, you can have unlimited citizenships. There's a few exceptions where if you have 3 or more, you have to start reporting it. But for the most part, the US, Canada, Australia, more recently, the UK, all those, you can have multiple different citizenships. When I left the US, I forget how many I had. I don't know, 3 or 4. Now I've got 5. I actually gave up the US citizenship, so I've got 5 and might, get more from there. So you can have multiple citizenships. Now, the requirement is that each of them would allow you to have that. So if you get citizenship by investment, where you're making a donation, you're buying property, you're doing something like that, they're kind of in the business of granting citizenship. So obviously, they're not going to force you to give up your other citizenships, or else they wouldn't have as many takers. Citizenship by descent, where you check your family tree, grandma was from Italy, great-grandfather was from Slovakia, whatever. That generally, most of those countries allow you. Lithuania is a little squirrely, as I found out myself. But most of these ways to get citizenship, you can have 1, you can have 2, you can have 5, you can have 10. The thing that Americans don't realize is, if you're an American, you're an American. You can choose to give up your U.S. citizenship. If you just want to save money on taxes, you can move to Puerto Rico and you can lower your taxes there. But if you're an American, you are an American. So it's not like, if you open a bank account, you have to report that bank account. If you open a foreign corporation, you have to report that corporation. And so you can't say, well, I opened that bank account as a Maltese citizen because I went to Malta and got their $1 million, give or take, citizenship. An American's an American and is an American. Even if your citizenship's not an issue, Americans are taxed no matter where they live. I lived all over the world. I didn't spend any time in the US, and I was able to basically exclude all of my income and defer the rest of it. That's a little harder now, but it's still largely possible. You can still reduce your taxes dramatically by living overseas, but you can never escape the US tax system. Even in Puerto Rico, you're still on the hook for all the foreign filings and all that. And so, even if you're Canadian, even if you're Australian and you live in those countries, you may have reporting requirements for doing other things. But very simply, yes, you can get multiple citizenships. That does not mean that you've given up your current citizenship. And again, for Americans, it doesn't mean you've given up those rights. But what you want to understand is the difference between a residence and citizenship. A residence lets you live somewhere, generally for a certain period of time. It's not quite as secure. Citizenship is, you're one of us. You have all the rights and privileges. And so I think that generally you want to either get citizenships or residences that lead to citizenship, even in some cases if you don't live there. So there's a lot of different things you want to consider. But I think every American needs a second passport. I think increasingly Canadians, Australians, others need a second passport because you never know when that first passport is going to be a hindrance.
For a lot of people, I've talked about this topic before, and some would say, look, I'm an American. I work a 9-to-5 job. I've lived in such and such city for the last 30 years. I'm not moving. This is where my job is. This is where my family is. I'm sure you've dealt with those particular situations before. Are there options for them? What can they do at all, if anything?
Yeah. I mean, certainly one of the most common ways that people become a citizen of a country is they live there and they pay taxes and they learn the language. And then you go and you see like the naturalization ceremonies. Everybody raise your right hand and they swear everybody in together. And now you're a citizen. Congratulations. If you don't want to leave and you're saying, my goodness, I think this country is going in the wrong direction. They're going to take more of our money. There was an article about Canada recently. They said, is civil unrest coming? Those weren't my words. That was what I think the police were suggesting. Is that coming? If you're worried about whatever, let's call it black swan events taking place, or even events that are pretty predictable, like your taxes are probably going to go up. Most Western countries are broke. They're probably going to raise your taxes eventually if you have anything of consequence. So there's programs you can get citizenship without having to move. So let's go through if you're lucky enough, probably the most affordable way to do that is citizenship by descent through your family tree. This is the one a la carte service that we offer people because I just figure, hey, there's plenty of Americans, Canadians, Australians. They have someone in the family tree. And if they just want that backup, it's the only thing we do on its own. And so you can go back, if your dad was British, for example, that's about as far back as you can go in most cases in a country like the UK or in Canada. But you get into Europe and some of the Latin American countries, you can go to a grandparent, like in Ireland. You can go to a great-grandparent, like in Italy. You can even go back further in like Slovakia. So most Caribbean and European countries and a lot of the Latin American countries let you go back at least some number of years. And you can basically say, hey, my great-grandfather was Italian. And as long as in some cases you can prove that like nobody ever gave it up and it was never lost through the chain, you can go back and reclaim that. And so it may not be the fastest way to do it, but pound for pound, it's the best value because an Italian passport, for example, lets you live anywhere in the European Union as well as Switzerland and Norway and Iceland. So you've got like 30 countries that you can live in. So even if you're like, oh, my ancestors were Bulgarian, I don't want to go to Bulgaria. Right, a Bulgarian can live in Spain, can live in Switzerland, can live in Ireland. And so you've got a lot of options, kind of like states or provinces in Canada. You can move around. You've got countries, which, by the way, there are plenty of good tax deals in Europe. So if you're Bulgarian by descent, you can move to Italy or Greece or Switzerland or Ireland or Malta or Cyprus. And even though their headline tax rates may be high, you might be able to pay very, very little as a percentage because they have a special deal for new people. And so that's the easiest thing to do is check your family tree. I would also say, let's say you're born in Toronto. I'm born right across the lake in Cleveland. What if my parent was born in Toronto by happenstance? Well, by virtue of citizenship by birth on the soil, my parent would be Canadian. And we've had that with Canada and Mexico. They never even realized their parent was Canadian or Mexican, which means they can be Canadian or Mexican. So that's the first thing. Otherwise, you can make a donation. Citizenship by investment in the Caribbean has been one of the cheapest ways to do it. You don't have to go there, although there is now an interview requirement. They just did double the price, though, because the Western countries are getting upset that people have this option that for years, for $100,000, you could get a second passport and you could leave your country forever and no longer owe them anything. And under the threat of security and maybe there's a terrorist coming in, I'm pretty pro-immigration, but, Nigel Farage is speaking at our event this year. Ask him how many boats are coming to Europe. We're not checking those people, but the guy with lots of money who goes through a rigorous background check, we can't get that. So because of the threats from Europe, the price of citizenship by investment in the Caribbean doubled. It's going to cost you $200,000 and up. But those are the two main ways. The third way is more exploratory, and that is you can get what's called a paper residence, where the country requires you to live there for X number of years, but they don't define living. And so it could be you go 1 day a year, which is the requirement to keep the residence permit active. But when you apply for citizenship, they don't ask how long you've been in the country. You may have to speak the language. But in some of the Latin American countries, that's a little easier than, let's say, learning Azerbaijani or something. Those aren't guaranteed, though. So that's kind of a cheaper path for, let's say, the 9 to 5 person. But, are you lucky? Do you have $200,000? Do you want to kind of gamble? Those are the ways without moving.